All right, chapter 18. Now back to Dan. Do you remember last chapter and the chapter before that and the chapter before that, we had the story of the big strong man? Samson? What tribe was Samson from? Dan. Yeah. So our author lumps these two together, telling us, that Samson, you're thinking about what he did. I want to tell you what happened before Samson's time. So that's what's going on here. We are sometime earlier in the book of Judges. It seems to be prior to Samson. And because the Danites are just now, this is the migration of Dan northward. So they're down here. This map didn't turn out exactly as I wanted it to, but the yellow is the yellow, if you can see it, is what got allotted to the tribe of Dan by Joshua. Kind of looks like a flying bat, or forgive me, but yeah, okay. Do you see the little star on the coast? You see that little point or whatever that is? A little dot there? Kind of sticks out of the coast in the middle. That is the city of Joppa, which became a seaport. Jonah fled from the Lord from Joppa, and Peter, right, saw the sail coming down out of heaven, or the sheet filled with unclean animals, So hippopotamus, or whatever else was, and they could eat all that now. That was also in Joppa. Well, and it's shaped like this. The tribe of Dan never occupied this land. This is what they were allotted, but they never did conquer it, so they never lived there. And the reason it looks like it does is instead of like an even top or something, is because Ephraim to the north had a town that stuck way down inside of Dan. And kind of makes me think that it was kind of two pieces that had just a narrow little neck. That, shaped a little bit like the way, what's a state that has that? New York and Long Island. They're only connected by, is it just a bridge actually? I don't think you can get to New York City on land. I think you have to take the bridge or the ferry. Right. Oh, and then Michigan, yeah. Because if you're sane, you drive all the way through Wisconsin. If you're not, then you take that crazy bridge that you can see through. That terrifies me. But Mackinac Bridge. When you drive on, the game you play with your kids when you drive over a bridge is they have to lift up their feet until we're over the bridge. Try that on the Mackinac Bridge once. Yeah, that's good for your abs. Yeah, okay. All right. So that's what Dan had. Let's begin the chapter finally. In those days, again, there was no king in Israel, and the tribe of Dan was looking for a territory to live in. Up to that time, among the tribes of Israel, no inheritance had fallen to them. And by fallen, we mean fallen. They didn't conquer anything. Who were the Danites supposed to drive out? Well, who's south and on the coast? The Philistines, and they were unable to drive them out, so they left. So the Danites are going to leave, and then what will the Lord do? He will conquer the Philistines with how many Danites? If the tribe can't do it, then the Lord says, I'll do it with one. So he sends in Samson to sort of poke and poke and poke until finally they put him into their temple, and then he collapses the whole thing on all of their rulers and kills thousands of them all in one moment. All right. So the Danites sent out 5 men from all their clans, from Zorah and Eshtaol. Let me stop at those 2 words. Back in the chapters about Samson, we heard those names a few times, Zorah and Eshtaol. Those are the hometowns where Samson was from. After he died, he was buried in between those 2 towns, Zorah and Eshtaol. That's where Manoah and his wife came from. And I'm under the opinion that Zorah and Eshtaol is all that the Danites had. So that's their whole territory, is 2 villages down here. So 5 men from all their clans from Zorah and Eshtaol. Does that make sense? That fits with the text, doesn't it? That all their clan, they just weren't very many. How many people does St. Paul's have right now? Our whole congregation? Around 2,200. During World War I, under Pastor Albrecht, we were up in the 1300s. So it had grown tremendously in the 50 or so years since it started. Then during World War II, we were down in the 600s for a while. The year the war ended, 1940. Yeah, the year after, 46. Pastor Schmidt writes in the roster, it's really a shame because so many people left New Ulm during the war because the war plants up in the cities and other places were offering 3 times what any of the factories and stuff in New Ulm could pay. So people just vanished from the city. New Ulm just emptied of people. We had a POW camp, but we didn't have a lot of people. And so St. Paul's collapsed by half, lost half. We had just 23 men still overseas in the year after the war, in 46, but very few. And then 20 years later, in the 1960s, Pastor Schmidt is able to say, we now have 1,600 people. So the congregation shrank very small. Some congregations, they get down that size and they're in danger of vanishing. But St. Paul's was able to recover and grow and expand once again. So Dan had really shrunk from the census that Moses took. Dan should have had thousands, and they're down to, they only have 1 brigade of soldiers at this point. I've talked about this a couple times. I don't expect Ron and Faith to know this, but how many guys in a brigade, or do you know? 600. Into the valley of death rode the 600 and whatnot, yeah. So that's what Dan is able to field at this point. So they send 5 spies to spy out the land and explore it, and he said to them, go and explore the land. They came to the hill country of Ephraim as far as the house of Micah, and spent the night there. Oh, great. Now we have spies. And what does Micah's house have? Money and idols. Yeah. I kind of wonder if these guys are thugs. Probably the clink of the coin is, they've got those 4 milk jugs full of silver, right? Or whatever she kept them in. So while they were near Micah's house, they recognized the accent of the young Levite. This is the second time in the book of Judges that somebody's speech gives them away. A couple chapters ago, we had the Shibboleth controversy, which is the difference. Because Shibboleth and Sibboleth, remember, mean crick or creek. So which one, how do you say it? Is it crick or is it creek? And if the guy said creek, they killed him, right? So that's what happened. Well, now this guy's accent gives him away, or his dialect or something. Ask the priest to go get some water. Oh, I'll go for the bubbler. Hey, he said bubbler. We know. You must be from. So now they recognize him. They approach him, and he said, because nobody in their right mind says bubbler, they would say drinking fountain. But who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? What is your business here? They sound like the sailors in the storm in Jonah, where they start grilling him. Who's your God? Who do you worship? What are you doing here? What are you running away from? He told them, this is what Micah has done for me. He has hired me, and this I've become his priest. Is he talking like maybe he knows these guys? Or at least he's comfortable talking to them? Remember, they forgot to check, or they forgot to do a background check on him. Who is this man? Who is this priest of Micah? Then they said to him, "Please inquire of God for us to find out if we will have a successful journey." The priest told them, "Go in peace. The journey you take is before the Lord." How did he know? Or did he have the yes-no rocks from under his ephod or whatever? What did he do? I don't know what he did. But the 5 men left there and went to Laish. Marcia, would you remember that we're on verse 7, please? Just verse 7, just keep it in your head, okay? Because I'm going to leave this slide. Okay? I'm going to go, nope, the other way. Laish, through the poem. I'm going to read you a poem later. There we go. Okay, now we're on slide 39. Okay. So Dan is on the bottom there, and you see Laish up north. It's almost 100 miles. So I think the natural route that they would have taken probably, and based on the direction they're going when they get to Ephraim here, is that they go down to the Jordan River Valley to take the easiest route up north. They're just going to find something without a lot of controversy, because all along the coast from where they're from are Philistines, and up north there are people from Tyre and Sidon, all these people. And if we go the other way, then we're going to run into Moabites and Edomites and Ammonites and whatever kind of ites there are. And there are, up in the mountains, there are Hivites and Hittites and Jebusites. So let's stay down by the river in the easy part of the land, go around the Sea of Galilee and find, and they found a place. They find the city, the village of Laish, way up north. Laish is on the bottom slope of a huge mountain called Mount Hermon, way up north. And do you see on this slide, there are even clouds up there? Because Mount Hermon generates its own weather. In fact, Mount Hermon often has snow most of the year. So, if you're ever doing a Bible trivia quiz and somebody asks you if there was snow in Israel when Jesus was born, you can say yes, because at least Mount Hermon had snow. Okay, what am I going back to? Verse 7? Take you all the way back through the poem, through this, and there we go. Okay. All right, here we go. The 5 men then left there and went to Laish. They saw people who were living there securely in the manner of the Sidonians. They probably were Sidonians, people from Sidon or Tyre. They were quiet and unsuspecting. They lacked nothing. There was no humiliating treaty in that land. No one possessed them or oppressed them. They were very far away from the Sidonians. They had no treaty with anyone. This is the book of Judges. What's about to happen to them? Ugh. In the horror movie, when the bunny hops into the screen, you just know something bad's going to happen. This is the bunny. So, not good. Okay. I suppose when they, again, my translation, when they returned to Zorah and Eshtaol, their relatives asked them, "What did you find out?" They answered, "Come on, let's attack them, for we have seen the land and it is very good." That's exactly what God said in the creation story. It is tov ma'od, it is very good. Are you just going to do nothing? Don't hesitate to go. Go in and take possession of the land. So grab your weapons and let's go, boys. When you get there, you'll find an unsuspecting people and a spacious land. God has handed it over to you. It is a land where nothing is lacking. 600 men, there they are. 600 men from the tribe of Dan set out from Zorah and Eshtaol, armed with weapons of war. They went up and camped at Kiriath Jearim in Judah. It's not very far from Jerusalem. This is why the place west of Kiriath Jearim is still called the Camp of Dan to this day. You have a different word in your NIV there? Is it Dan something? David, do you have it? It's 12. What is it? Hanan Dan? Hanan Dan, yeah. Camp of Dan would be a way of doing it. Camp of Dan. From there, they moved into the hill country of Ephraim and came to Micah's house. They're heading down the slope, as I said, down toward the Jordan River Valley. That's why I think they took that route, because that's the direction they're taking as they go. Can I read you a poem? It's in the style of Beowulf, and which I read every couple of years, and I'm very fond of Beowulf. And so this is a poem about what's happening here. So here we go. 600 men with 600 spears moved like a rumor through the hilltops of Judah. Allowed to pass through by their Israelite brothers, they entered into Ephraim and found a town surrounded by hill crests. It was the home of Micah, grown now into a village with family and friends, all around the shrine of Micah's mother. The ephod, the teraphim, the idol, and the calf, all these things tended by the young Levite priest, too young to sacrifice at the temple of the Lord, too greedy to wait for the proper time. He played church with the idols, fingering the silver, and led his flock far astray on the hilltop. What would the 600 spearmen think? What would the 600 Danites do? Ephraim was no place for them to settle down. Their goal was 100 miles to the north, to the unsuspecting hamlet of Laish, where a small Sidonian laity encamped too far from any help. The Danites were bent on conquest. But here in Ephraim, here at the house of Micah, their mind would soon turn to plunder and theft. They would hear the priest, see the silver, behold the ephod, and dream of having their very own shrine. What was poison for a family would infect all of Dan. What was poison for a few would now spread through a whole tribe. O Dan, beware those who have forsaken God's law. Be warned. If anyone turns a deaf ear to the law, even his prayers are detestable. Do not covet what God detests. Do not set your heart on what brings nations down. Do not become like the Canaanites you set out to destroy. What will God think of Dan if the 600 destroy the Sidonian outpost only to become like the Sidonians themselves? That's what Beowulf is like. Back to our text. The 5 men who had gone to spy out the land of Laish told their brothers, "Did you know that in one of these houses there are an ephod, household gods, a carved image, and a silver idol? Now consider what you should do. There's cash. What do you think we should do?" It's a little bit like a Western, isn't it? This is the scene before they go and get Marshall Dillon, right? When the guy comes and just shoots up the whole bar or whatever. What happens to the bartender whenever they shoot up the bar? If he tries to defend himself, he gets killed. If he doesn't try to defend himself, he might live through it, right? That's the rule. So they turned aside there and went to the house of the young Levite at the home of Micah and greeted him. If guys were plundering your house, out they walk with your microwave and your stereo and your big screen TV, and then they say, "Hi, good evening." They greeted him. Or is this another evidence that they forgot to do a background check on this guy? Who is this guy? The 600 Danite men were standing by the entrance of the city gate, armed with their weapons. So while they're plundering the house, this brigade of soldiers are there nearby, all armed. Then the 5 men who had gone to spy out the land went in and took the carved image, the ephod, the household gods. And this, notice how the list of the idols keeps getting repeated and repeated and repeated. What'd they take? Let me get out the list. And the silver idol, while the priest was standing by the entrance of the city gate with the 600 men armed with their weapons. When they entered Micah's house and took the carved image, the ephod, and the household gods, and the silver idol, the priest said to them, "What are you doing?" They told him, "Be quiet." I really thought about it. What would this be in really colloquial modern English? Shut up! I think, probably. It didn't seem right to have shut up in the Bible, though. So I left be quiet. But don't say a word. Come with us and be our father and priest. It is better for you to be a priest for a tribe and family in Israel than to be a priest for the house of one person. So they offer him a job. Why had he left Bethlehem? His family was assigned to Bethlehem. Did he leave because, as I hinted at in the poem, was he just too young to be a priest yet? He wanted to go and make his fortune? Is he the prodigal son? Except this guy doesn't come back like the prodigal son. He doesn't repent. Next summer, I think we're in, no, is it the summer after next? No, anyway, we'll be in a Luke year. We'll have the prodigal son as a gospel lesson. Should we throw this in as the Old Testament text for the prodigal son? Yikes. The priest was pleased and took the ephod, the household gods, the carved image, and went with the tribe. So, yeah, he gets to stay with the money. They prepared to leave, putting their children, their livestock, and their possessions in front of them. Who also sent his family ahead of him when he moved from place to place? Jacob, yeah. Why would he do this? Why would they do this now? They're heading north. They keep the soldiers down south, and they send the wives and the kiddies up in the front. Well, they just robbed this place. So where do you want your soldiers? In the rear guard, yeah. So, something, Neoko? No, just stretching? That's okay. That's perfectly okay. After they had gone some distance from Micah's house, the men who were in the houses nearby were called together and caught up with the Danites. So the guys get together and chase them. They shouted to them. And so the Danites turned to face them and said to Micah, "What's the matter with you that you called out your men?" So Micah led them up there. The way Abraham chased after the Kedorlaomer and the other guys when they came down and kidnapped Lot and so forth. Different outcome this time. He said, "You took the gods I had made and the priest and went away. What do I have left? How can you say to me, what's the matter with you?" Do you remember how we were introduced to Micah at the beginning of the previous chapter? What had he done? He stole his mother's silver. And now he gets mad when what happens to him? They steal his mother's silver. Yeah, basically, it's, this is what happens. How can you say, what's the matter with you, he says. But the Danites said to him, "Don't argue with us, or some angry men will attack you, and you and your family will lose your lives." Weekday mornings, I come to the office, and I eat my breakfast at my desk, and I allow myself one and only one YouTube video. Okay? I do. And just this morning, the history guy hadn't posted his video yet. So I just clicked on something that was on the page, and it was this really sad scene from out east somewhere. A local politician, not a state guy, but some local politician, village commissioner or something, had been stopped by a traffic cop for speeding. I think he was going 20 miles an hour over the posted in-town speed limit and was texting while he was speeding. He's like going 60 in a 40 zone and texting at the same time. So the traffic cop does what she should have done, right? She pulls him over and she walks up, and even before she can say, License and registration, please. He angrily shakes his fist at her and says, do you know who I am? Well, does it matter who he is? Does being elected as a small town local official entitle you to break whatever law you feel like? But it's a sad video because it just escalates. He just gets more and more abusive and offensive and threatening. And he threatens her job. He's being very rude to her and very threatening. And he says, you were rude to me. That's why I'm doing this. Rude? She asked him for license and registration. He couldn't find his registration. And she says, you don't have a registration? And, that's what sets him off. And, of course, what's the matter? When we get caught in a sin, what's our instinct usually? I should attack. Who are you to accuse me of a sin? Or whatever. That's what we think. The guy's a perfect example of it, and of many people in the world who, when they're confronted by their own sins, they just go on the attack. That's what happens here. You and your family will lose your lives. Then the Danites went on their way, and Micah turned to go back home because he saw that they were too strong for him. This is the end of Micah in the account. We don't go back to him anymore. It's sad, isn't it? I mean, for a minute there, I don't know, did you kind of become attached to Micah? Maybe not. I don't know. Is he the hero? Is there a hero? What is this? It's like a story about pirates fighting each other. It's just, yeah. After they had taken the things Micah had made along with the priest, they went up to Laish, to that quiet and unsuspecting people. They attacked them with their swords and burned the city. There was no one to rescue them because it was too far from Sidon, and they had no agreement with anyone. It was in the valley near Beth Rehob. The phrase "no agreement with anyone" in Hebrew could be also, if you change one letter, no agreement with the Arameans. It doesn't matter one way or the other. It doesn't change the theology or anything like that. And it comes out to the same thing in the end. But they didn't have a treaty. They couldn't ask for help. They were too far away for anybody. So the Danites go up and they conquer Laish. And now this little force, they have 600 warriors and they have their wives and their children with them. They've conquered this city, wiped out the inhabitants, and they rebuilt the city and lived in it. They named it Dan, after the name of their forefather Dan, who was born to Israel. This was the city formerly called Laish. My favorite geographer of the Bible is a sailor who in 1849 was assigned by the United States Navy to make the very first naval survey of the waterways of Israel. So Lieutenant Lynch from Virginia, he ended up in the Civil War as a Confederate Navy captain. But this is decades before that. This is 1849, or 15 years before. So Lieutenant Lynch goes, and he makes a description and surveys the Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, the Dead Sea, and the other waterways, Joppa, and so forth. And he describes Laish as a place with deep gorges through which clear streams still flowed, the ruins of many times from towns from Roman or Crusader times, an olive orchard. He says that at the time, much durra, which is millet is kind of what? Super cheap, not quite rice or grain. It's just, I don't know. You'd think to yourself, I'd rather have gruel than to have millet. At least that's what I think of it. Maybe it's good with sugar. I don't know. Anyway, they have a lot of millet and rice, but hardly any wheat that was cultivated there. So Lieutenant Lynch is also interesting to write. You can find his stuff online. I printed a copy in my office. But he he's obviously got a wonderful Christian faith and a childlike understanding of the Bible and faith, because he'll say stuff in the middle of his official naval report to the Admiralty with, this is where our Lord Jesus sat down with the 5,000 and fed them, and stuff like that. So it's kind of cool that he does that. I also like reading Lynch because he's not like a British guy or something. He's an American. So he's writing in my dialect, right? And he's writing in the 1840s before industrialization changed everything in Israel. So from him back to Luther's time, back to the Crusades, back to Jesus' time, there had been not much change in Palestine, at least geographically. It hadn't been overrun with cities and sewers and electric poles and telephone poles and stuff. So it was still basically the same land, and that's what Lynch gives us. So, and he's the very first American to do it, and the last one before industrialization. So that's why I kind of treasure his account. Delightful little account. Okay, this is how the chapter ends. The Danites set up the carved image there for themselves. Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Moses, and his sons were priests for the Danite tribe. Is that the guy's name now, finally? Jonathan? Until the time of the captivity of the ark. They set up Micah's carved image that he had made, yet all the while the house of God was in Shiloh. So, I'm not sure what is meant by the time of the captivity of the ark. It's possible that this is a reference to when the Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant in Samuel's time, a little bit later. Also because it had been at Shiloh at that time. And he's a reference to Shiloh. It's also a hint about what's going to happen later, because long after this, long after the time of the kings, of David and Solomon, Solomon's son Rehoboam will have the northern tribes torn away from him. And the first king of the north is a man named Jeroboam, or we call him Jeroboam the first. Jeroboam set up an idol, where? Dan. At Dan. Yeah. Even though the house of God was elsewhere. In fact, in Solomon's time when that happened, it was still at Shiloh. So, fascinating references here to what's happening with worship. Worship wasn't right. They weren't right with God. They didn't know what they were doing. Everybody did what they saw fit, and it was crazy. But that's a lot like what our culture is spinning off out of control into being today. But God is still with us. It should drive us more deeply into his word and into repentance. Lord, teach us your way. Sanctify us by your truth. Your word is truth. Next week we'll finish the book. God bless you until then. Thanks for letting me do this. See you next time. You've been listening to Invisible Church, the Bible study podcast from St. Paul's Lutheran Church, New Ulm, Minnesota.